Call to order the Finance Committee meeting for Wednesday, May 26, 2021. Could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr.
Present.
Swanson? Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Ms. Polk?
Aye.
Ms. Weber? Mr. Payton? Ms. Parker?
Present.
Mr. Kinzinger? Mr. Fairfield?
Here.
Mr. Featherling?
Here.
Mr. Dunnell?
Present.
Mr. Miller?
Present.
Mr. Long?
Present.
Mr. Hunter?
Here.
Mr. Wheeler?
Present.
Mr. Searoy?
Present.
We have a quorum.
I have no requests for public comment. Are there any requests for public comment? Seeing no requests for public comment, we'll turn to, there are no presentations. The approval of the minutes for April 28th. Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Featherling
Polk.
and Polk, seconds. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
On Zoom, are they all ayes?
Aye.
Okay, those opposed? Hearing no opposition, the motion carries. We turn to the Finance Committee. We'll start with the fiscal year 2020 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. If you'd come forward, please. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you this morning?
Pretty
Good.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Carmen Huizinga from SKDO. And for those of you who may not know me, I've been working on the audit for several years, and our firm has been doing it for several years, but there's a lot of familiar faces, so I know a lot of you have seen me before. I'm just gonna give you some highlights of the audit report and the audit process from this year. Your fiscal year end is November 30, and then there's about 60 days that it takes to get the books all closed, and then we come in and start the audit. So it is a long process. In your packets, I think electronically you received a copy of the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. It is large. It's 150 plus pages. This is in the format that the Government Finance Officers Association requires in order to get the Certificate of Excellence in Reporting that the county applies for the past probably 5 years. So they've received that certificate each year. So they're very picky and they're very strict on how things are presented and in what order, and make sure they follow all the standards. So it is quite a process to get everything put together, and it's a big coordination of efforts across all of the departments to get all that information rolled up. So I'll just go through some highlights of that report. Our job as auditors is to provide an opinion on those financial statements, to say whether we believe they are materially correct. And we gave an unmodified opinion, which means we believe they are materially correct. We also do an audit under government audit standards, and that means we get an understanding of your internal controls. We look at some compliance issues that could potentially affect the financial statements if there was non-compliance. And we had no matters of non-compliance that were required to be reported under the government auditing standards. And we also did not note any material weaknesses in financial reporting controls, internal controls over financial reporting this year. So that's important. The past few years, you have had some material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in the internal control that we have reported to you. So those have been cleared and they are no longer reported. In your packets, you also received some communications from us. There's some required communications from us as auditors to you as a board. That letter is a few pages. It has a restriction on use at the top of the report. Basically, that's boilerplate language. However, if we would run into difficulties or have things that we felt like the board or the governance needed to know about the audit process, those exceptions or explanations would be in this letter to you. So basically, there's nothing of importance or anything specific to mention there. It's basically just the boilerplate language in that letter at this point in time. Yes. You have a question?
Yeah, I do.
Mr. Hunter?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. With all due respect, did we receive a management letter?
You did.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that the stuff that you electronically sent us?
It should have been electronically sent possibly, and it should be in front of you in your packets as
Okay,
well. So that is just a one-page letter. That's the second piece of communication that we gave to you.
Okay.
And it starts out in planning and performing our audit of the financial statements.
Yeah.
So
okay.
anything that we come across when we're doing the audit that we feel like is of importance or significance to communicate to you, it doesn't rise to the level of a finding, meaning it's not a material weakness, it's not a significant deficiency, but just for transparency's sake, we like to report those things so that you understand what we ran across, and then we have a chance to communicate any best practices to you, any recommendations that then you can take and implement. So those things are in your packet. I will let you, look over those. If you have questions, you can talk to me, you can talk to the board chairman, you can talk to Steve's office. So any department heads who this affects have been communicated with. They're already aware of everything that's in this letter. So now I'll get into the actual report. Probably unlike myself and my coworker who read cover to cover this report, you probably aren't going to be interested in doing that. So I would recommend that you read the management's discussion and analysis. And that's going to be near the front of the report. You do not have that in front of you. That was sent electronically. But that is written by the finance department, and it's a basic overview of the financial statements, and it gives several of the highlights, shows you how they're organized, and then goes into some of the just narrative about what happened at the county during the year, what the future might look like, that kind of thing.
Is that this one?
This is the management.
That's from Mr. McCurdy.
This is the letter of transmittal.
Okay.
So at the beginning of the audit report, the big audit report, there's also a letter of transmittal that's written by Steve McCarty and another kind of introduction to the financials. So those two things would give you a good overview, and they're more in lay language and not so accounting and technical, if that's more your style. There's some charts and graphs in there as well.
Mr. Hunter?
Yeah, just one more question. On a scale of 1 to 10, regarding your audit report and findings, how would you characterize our performance empirically?
Well, since there were no material weaknesses in internal control and no significant deficiencies in internal control, that's good. We had no matters of non-compliance that we were required to report. So any of that stuff would have risen to the level of showing up in this report, and then would have required a formal response from the county, a formal corrective action plan. So you didn't have any of those things. And then the things that are in the management letter are kind of at a level below that, where we're bringing those to your attention to be able to implement and correct.
So the teacher gives us a star?
I guess if that's how you want to say it. It's an unmodified opinion as well on the financial statements.
Thank
so if there were things that were materially misstated, or if we came across something in the audit that the county said, no, we're not adjusting it, we're not changing it, and it wasn't in accordance with the standards, then we would take exception to that and say, well, in our opinion, except for, it would be in accordance with accounting principles.
Thank you.
So.
Not bad, huh?
Okay, So just to visit the numbers don't look extremely different than what you have seen as of November 30 last year. But I will point out some of the highlights. In the financial statements, there's a statement of net position, which is a very high-level summarized information on your governmental activities and your business type activities. So that statement divides pretty much everything except 911 or ETSB and the animal control into governmental activities. So those are all your special funds, your general fund, your tort, your pension, highway, lump sum all together. And that the net position, kind of like your equity position, increased $4.8 million in total in FY20. And for those of you who have been on the board for a while, that's also good news because there were several years where that just kept going down and down and it was negative instead of positive. So the trend has reversed and now it is a positive trend. And I know that's, been communicated to you and you have been discussing that. So in those governmental activities, the net position was $45.3 million. Most of that is your investment in capital assets, to be honest. And then the rest of it is, well, there isn't much more that would be positive, but there's restricted funds in there, which would be your special levy funds or those special fee funds. You can't just spend those for general operations. Those are all for specific purposes. And then because you have restricted net position and then those capital assets that aren't really liquid, it does put your unrestricted net position into a deficit position. That's not unusual for governmental entities on this statement of net position because capital assets usually are very, very large.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Now, that unrestricted, I would think in the big picture it's a small amount, but am I reading it right that was increased slightly?
The unrestricted deficit increased slightly. I mean, basically, it stayed about the same if you consider how big you are, but yeah. And you guys don't normally look at your financials on that basis. You're not looking at your capital assets and depreciation and the long-term debt. You're usually looking at more of a current measurement focus when you're looking at your financials month to month. And so on these financials, that is part of that reporting process where we roll all of that up and do it more on a traditional type of accounting where you capitalize all of that and then report all the long-term debt. I did have in your packet a description of the significant liabilities of the county. So long-term liabilities ended up at $36.5 million. That was a significant decrease, about $17.5 million, but that's due to the pension measurement. So that's a pretty volatile number. In FY19, that number increased by $17 million due to pension, and then in FY20, it turned around and backed off by $17 million. So those are actuarial calculations, they're estimates. Can be volatile depending on what the market's doing and depending on what the other factors are that going into those actuarial calculations. So we don't do those calculations. We rely on IMRF and their actuaries to give us that information to then report in the financial statements. Your debt and capital leases came out to $11.2 million. Pension, like I said, the total liability was about $18.8 million, which was a decrease. And then we also measure other post-employment benefits. That long-term liability is basically there's certain union contracts that allow for employees to get paid a subsidy for their health insurance when they retire, a monthly subsidy. So the actuary takes an estimate of, okay, these are how many employees are working right now. We estimate this how much sick time they'll take, and this is what will cost the county down the road. So that came out at about $5 million. And then also we measure compensated absences. So there's sick pay upon retirement as well that gets measured in there. So those are all numbers that don't get calculated on a monthly basis for you guys to see. Those are the things that get rolled up in those higher level statements at the end of the year. So I thought that was worth pointing out. Your statement of activities in the financial report is more like an income statement, although it doesn't look like an income statement. For governmental reporting, they measure the expenses by function. So they say, okay, what's your public safety expenses? What is your general government expenses? Now, what charges for services do you have? What things are you bringing in that the public is paying for to receive those services? That offsets it. And then it comes down to a net expense number that is funded by taxes, property taxes, income taxes, general revenues, like that. So on the statement of activities, if you look at that statement in your report, consistent with past years, public safety is the largest function of the county, followed by transportation, court services, and general government. So that, I think, is typical, you know, of a local government. Some highlights there: your general government activities, the increase in net position for fiscal year 20 was $3.5 million, and the business type activities increased by $1.3 million. Following those two highly summarized statements are more detailed statements called the fund statements, and then those are going to be more what you're used to seeing on a regular basis, although they're still more summarized than what you normally see. But the financial statements organize it by major funds. So basically the biggest funds get reported separately, and then everything else is aggregated together. So the general fund, the tort fund are combined as one fund on those financial statements, and then the other major funds were pension, highway, and county bridge. The combined general fund, which would be tort and general fund, ended up with a positive fund balance of $4.8 million. The general fund excluding tort ended with a positive fund balance of $1.8 million. And 2019 and 2020 were the first 2 years since 2012 that the general fund ended up in a positive position, meaning basically it wasn't borrowing from some of those restricted funds for your operations. So. Just a few highlights of the increases and decreases in revenues and expenditures. I think you're all aware your inmate housing decreased significantly in 2020, although the related expenses also decreased. So kind of everything just came down. There was an increase in taxes and intergovernmental revenues. And there were some capital outlay expenditures that were then offset by other financing sources like debt proceeds that were also reported on those financials. The fund financials also present those enterprise funds, which would be your ETSB and your animal control. ETSB is also considered a major fund. It's large enough, big enough. And ETSB has continued to make significant investments into their infrastructure, replacing a lot of their tower equipment, their radio equipment, and then working with the other local entities to have a coordinated effort in that. There are also fiduciary funds in your financial statements. So there are a lot of funds that are tracked and measured by the county, but it's not the county's money. So those are reported in there. Those include your private purpose trust funds like the township motor fuel funds, and then the circuit clerk bonds. So if you go to the circuit clerk and you have to pay a bond, they hold it in trust until your case is dismissed, and then you either get a refund or it gets applied to your fines and fees. So the circuit clerk holds those, but it's not really their money. There's another classification of agency funds, the county collector fund, the circuit clerk fund that are not those bond fees, the county clerk, and then the sheriff commissary. Those are some of the bigger ones where the county is handling that money, but again, it's not used for county operations. It's used for something else. The remaining bulk of the report includes the footnotes, so the disclosures that explain more about the numbers, explain everything about your accounting policies. There's budgetary comparisons for all of the funds. And there's also combining statements that show more detail of what the numbers are in the front of the report, and then some statistical information. Additional reports that we issue through the audit are the single audit report. So when an entity receives and spends more than $750,000 that was originated at the federal level, it might have been passed through the state, passed through other agencies, but if it originated at the federal level and you spent it, and it was more than $750, you're subject to that single audit. So there are some compliance things that we need to test for and look at, and then we issue a separate report under a separate cover for that. That audit is not complete. This year, with all the COVID grants, it created a lot more, well, everything was new. So the health department was dealing with all new funding sources. The finance department, was trying to measure all that CURES grant that came through and got allocated to all the departments. And then we as auditors are trying to figure out, okay, what are those funding streams? How are they classified? And then what specific compliance things do we need to test? So we're hoping to complete that in the next week to 2 weeks. So that's technically due within a month after this report is audited. So we have 30 days to get that all of that done. And then another report that we're required to issue is the circuit clerk compliance audit. So the Office of the Courts requires them to have a compliance audit where we look at their assessments and whether they're passing that money through to the proper agencies at the right time. So that report was issued at the beginning of this week. It's final, and it will be sent to the state. And we've had an ongoing thing there with some segregation of duties in the accounting function, but they have hired another position there, so hopefully that will be taken care of going forward. Like I said, I just kind of wanted to explain the process and explain the financials to you so that if you do want to look at them, you can navigate your way through those. I'd also like to take some time to introduce Jackie Miles. She's sitting in the back. She is our accounting and audit manager at the firm, and she spends significant time on this county audit as well. So a lot of you have seen her face, but I don't think she's been at one of these meetings before. So I just wanted to acknowledge her contribution to the audit process and thank her for that. And then I want to thank Steve's department for sure, because they put in a ton of time to get everything ready for us. And I see a lot of different department heads in here who also provide information to us, answer our questions, and are very cooperative. So we thank them for that. So I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity to do your audit. If anybody has any questions, go ahead.
Ms. Weber.
I just want to thank you too for your efficiency, but also for including this lovely chart that has a line going above the line.
Well, and I will say that's in the MD&A. I pulled that out of your MD&A, the management's discussion and analysis. So that's also in the comprehensive report.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? If not, a motion to accept and place on file would be in order. Mr. Fairfield, is there a second? Mr. Long? Let's have a roll call vote on that, please.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Ms. Polk?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield?
Aye.
Mr. Featherling?
Aye.
Mr. Dennell?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your work. We turn to the Finance Department miscellaneous reports and discussion. Mr. McCarty, if you would come up. We have in the packet those miscellaneous reports, if you want to start examining those, if you haven't had a chance already. As he approaches. All right, let's see, sales tax.
I'll get there in a minute.
When you get older.
Basketball playing days have caught up to me for sure. And the hard part is I don't even know what I did. So if I look perplexed today, it's not because of the information I'm covering. It's because of the pain that my knee's in. So please discount that if you would. So don't interpret that. All right, we have some positive news on the tax side. A lot of good deposits this month. So we'll continue to watch that as far as trend versus individual, one of them being income tax, and I highlighted a few on the income tax page. Going back a few years, we've seen this in the April information that shows up in May. In the past, this month has been a high month, and we were fortunate to get this in a very important cash flow time. That's a nice number to have. And the other really unusual one was in the PPRT report. And I could not find a number that high in any of the past numbers, so I'm not sure how to explain that one, but it's in the bank, so.
We'll take it.
Yeah, not gonna call anybody and tell them they. Yeah, those are a few highlights. I won't spend a lot of time unless anybody's got any questions, but positive trend at this point.
Seeing no questions, please go on.
On to the cash flow. If we look at FY 21, I expanded out to August for this report. And I also took out the early distribution just so we could see running on our own through June what that could look like. We have 3 payrolls in July, so there'll be a very early payroll right at the beginning of July. So we'll watch this real close, but this number was lower, but some of these deposits that have come in has significantly helped that. And if you look at the April 21 miscellaneous receipts, you can see last year's average is what I've been using of just over 2,055,000. We had 2.7 million show up in miscellaneous receipts. So, and so far in May, I ran what we all have already collected, and we're in the neighborhood of 2.5 million. So that has helped. So I'll communicate with Nick as we go through June and see how the deposits continue through into June, and watch to see if we'll need early distribution or not. I know the taxes have gone out because I received mine personally. So, so we'll keep an eye on that and watch that. But June is the final month. So I opened up July and August, and as you can see, once that first distribution hits, then we're not sweating it out as much and watching it as close. But so we made it through May, and now June is the next one. So this is just a picture of where we're at and what we watch on a regular basis here. So I don't know if there's any questions there or not.
Questions on cash flow?
Then the next section we have 2 claims, both for Illinois Fire and Equipment, and both for retirement badges. This is how they arrived in our office. So we're here for.
All right, to start this discussion, could we have a motion to approve these? Mr. Hess? Ms. Parker, seconds. Any discussion on it? This is spending money. The motion is to approve these two payments. A roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Hess. Aye. Ms. Polk,
Aye.
Ms. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Ms. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dennell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. Next would be the monthly claims
Monthly
report.
claims report.
You had a copy of the monthly claims report submitted to you. Is there a motion to approve monthly claims?
Polk.
Polk, a second. Weber? Any discussion on the monthly claims? If there is no discussion, a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Hess. Aye. Ms. Polk,
Aye.
Ms. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Ms. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dennell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Motion carries.
We move to the American Rescue Plan.
Yes, as all of you received the update from the NACO version of the rules and recommendations and suggestions and examples and things they had in there. And I believe that was extremely helpful and provide a lot more clarity than the original information received from the Department of Treasury. In line with that, after reading through the NACO information, introducing the addition of another fund. So the board, this committee and the board has already approved the American Rescue Plan Fund and its budget. And now we're recommending using, or creating, I should say, a lost revenue fund, which is very much a part of the possibility and the calculations that is provided in this whole program. And we did kind of a chart or a flow chart, try to identify. So originally we thought that the funds would end up primarily in the general fund, but with a lot of the restrictive language of this is saying that it cannot be used for debt service. It cannot be used to increase any kind of reserve, pension, etc. We thought it might be beneficial to create a separate fund and title it the Lost Revenue Fund, the ARPA Lost Revenue Fund, and just so instead of funds flowing into the general fund, potential relief of expense, if you will, as far as a general fund or other special fund benefits, might be just expense relief in various categories. So that's kind of a shortened version of how we might, we feel the best way to transact this. So if there's ever, which we would expect and anticipate and always plan for, an audit of these funds, I believe this will be the cleanest way to transact it and be able to explain to anyone, especially an audit group that would come down specifically for this, to do this. So that's just a workflow. The next one I have to further explain the loss, an example for a lost revenue calculation. The NACO information identified using entity-wide. So instead of just using the general fund and in all the specific special funds, is to group it together. So the entity-wide numbers are the very first part of the year-end financial statement that we just went over. You have the draft. So the very first after the MD&A, those are entity-wide, so everything gets pulled together. It's a little bit more challenging. It sounds simple, but it's more challenging because you also have to pull out federal grants. You have to pull out a number of things, so it's a little bit harder to go back in and pull those out. But that's what they're using. So this is an example, just a hypothetical example of how to calculate to get money to the lost revenue fund underneath how the ARPA information is written. So the starting point is your 2019 actual revenue. And then they give two models. This one's using their standard model of 4.1% assumed growth. So they're allowing governments to use 4.1% on top of their 2019 actual. So using that, and then you plug in your actual, then what actually did happen. So you have an estimated through the model and then actual. So the difference amounts will be the amount that will be transferred from the ARPA fund to the lost revenue fund is how that's happening. And then we can do that through FY24. So all of this ends December 31st, 2024, and everything's got to be obligated, but you have till 2026 to actually finish the projects and finish the activity. But the planning and the application part of it ends at the end of 2024. So this is potentially like year to year an example of funds that could be transferred through this calculation that they provided from the ARPA fund to the lost revenue fund.
A couple of questions, if I might. You're saying they provided, was this NACO provided or the Department of Treasury?
The Department of Treasury provided this calculation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are they going to revise each year the percentage that you referred to?
No, the way it's written right now, it says 4.1% for
each of these years.
Each of those years of growth, assumed annual growth. And they said you could go back to the previous 3 years and use your own, and if it's different, you could use that. But 4.1% is a very generous calculation. So. All
right, now if I might, one more. I was looking at the claims, and I noticed in one of our claims, our transaction description talked about COVID meals for inmates in isolation. So obviously, we're not going to go back and examine individual claims to identify where we have this.
We can. The dates for this start in beginning of like March. I don't have the date. It's beginning of March of 2021, so it doesn't overlap into.
But I hear you recommending using this approach rather than going back through individual claims.
No. Yeah, there's going to be multiple approaches to this.
Okay.
So this is one of many as far as how to do this. So we can go back to those specific claims, and that does not affect the lost revenue calculation at all.
Oh, all right.
It's an that's an addition to as well as this.
That's an addition to.
Yes.
Okay.
But the restriction is the date. All right. It doesn't overlap with the CURE grant. So if something happened in fiscal year 20 that the CURE grant, anything we received for that time frame, if it didn't cover it, it didn't cover it. So we can only go back to March of this year of 2021 and then go forward to the end of December of 2024. So that's how these funds are written, and the restriction as far as the date range. But the lost revenue is a calculation back from FY, specifically for FY20. So it is a mix. It's not. That's why it is all over the place, and that's why this is very difficult to figure out how to plug it all in. It's about as clear as mud.
Mr. Wheeler, did you have a question?
It was more along those lines. I don't know. Yeah, it's on the. It was clarification because I think we were conflating two things there. But they are related. And then one of the questions was the extra expenses, and I'll use the state's not taking people from DOC. If we don't get that money from them, we can get it from this fund, correct here, and that would that fall into the non-ARPA money? Would that fall into the bucket that we're talking about? They're creating now, the new one.
Yeah, I mean.
That should be free and
That could
clear.
actually be the ARPA money, it's a good question, I did not clarify. I may go back, if I go back to this one, this particular page. We have at the top, or right underneath the titles there, ARPA identified and then county board identified. NACO really went into a lot of detail in some of the examples. So ARPA identified means specifically what the Department of Treasury outlined, and it's very similar to what we all heard when it was originally passed. The lost revenue calculation, and once that gets dropped in, NACO went to a lot of trouble to explain that the county board has another level of latitude in how they decide to use the lost revenue funds. It's more open than the ARPA. So if something is directly and specifically related to COVID, it can go directly to the ARPA fund. So we will have, there'll be a lot going on, but this is just an overview of how to do that. So there is latitude that the county board can use with the lost revenue calculation. That is different than some of the specific language that came out for the ARPA fund.
So it's much less restrictive.
Yes.
There are restrictions.
There are restrictions,
But it's much less.
Yes.
I would say it's in our best interest to have less restricted money that we can still spend on COVID reasons.
Right.
Part of this is because there's like a quarterly prove up with the Department of Treasury that we have to submit and basically be audited on these expenses. And as it stands right now, there's nobody on the other end of the phone line to ask questions. Is this legitimate? Can we use it for this expense? Does it pass muster as far as Treasury goes? So we have to be careful not to spend more than if they say, hey, that's not a valid reason. We have to have that money in the other fund or the general fund. I hope that makes sense the way that I put that. It's better to have more and free and clear just to cover our bases down the road.
Mr. Wheeler, Ms. Hunter. Mr. Hunter.
Thank you very much. Steve, I got a question. Two questions, actually. Could you expand these categories which you have listed here additionally? As well as I'd like to give you an example of community assistance. For example, XYZ organization 501c3 who is helping with inoculations. And that would be an appropriate activity, right, that could be funded?
Potentially, yes.
Okay, now, my first question was, can you add additional categories if necessary, if identified?
Yeah, if it's COVID related, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, these were some of the basic categories. I just, enlisted them that come, from the information, but there's a lot of lower level stuff that, we could keep adding, but as long as it's COVID related, yes, I mean,
Yeah,
that's.
yeah, these are macro here, yes,
Yeah.
so, yeah, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
So, Steve, I'm sorry, Chairman. So you're looking for the head nod because I think when we met yesterday, Steve had this idea and met with Anita and I, and it was a good discussion, but it was after the agenda was out. So we can't have a motion to create this fund here, but I do see a reason to be able to have to take this to the full board because the money could show up and we have to segregate things. So I think that's what you're looking for as a head nod. Do you agree to bring it to the full board instead of waiting a whole month to then come in July? And I think that's what you're asking, correct?
Yeah, I put the last page in, showing the creation of a new fund with starting out with 5 million, I believe will be adequate for fiscal year 21 for this ARPA lost revenue fund. So it's not officially on the agenda because of all this showing up, and this new understanding showed up after we did the agenda. But I guess does the committee want to come back next month and vote on it, or head nod, or our agreement to just take it straight to June's full board and go at the full board. So.
Mr. Hess.
Thank you, Chairman. We have the American Rescue Plan update on here. Mr. Coughlin is in the back. Can we ask him if we can vote on this?
Ask him, yeah.
It's a budget amendment, that's why I was leery, so that was my hesitation.
Excuse me, go ahead.
If it's just listed for informational purposes, you should take it to the full board. You shouldn't vote on it today.
We thought. Yeah.
But there's no reason that you can't vote on it for the full board. It doesn't have to go through finance.
All right. Go for it, Mr. Fairfield.
I'd like to make a motion, we send it to the full county board for a vote.
It's just a head nod, I'm sorry, that motion.
Yeah,
would be out of order.
we wouldn't need that motion.
Okay.
This will be on the agenda for the full board, and this committee has been made aware of the discussion that has taken place. We just put it that way. If we thought that we were going to have difficulties at the full board, boy, we might have to reevaluate, but I'm not seeing any questions suggesting we're going to have difficulties. Anyone have any problems that they see? If nobody has any problems, why this will be on the agenda for the full board.
And then
Anything more?
the general update for this is like anything new and as big as this is, there were some problems that we had with the initial application, but we now have confirmation that it is approved. There's a 4-day review, so I don't know if after 4 days, I still we're kind of working in the dark in a way, trying to feel the step by step of this. So I don't have a clear picture to tell you like the money will be here in X, but we do know we finally made it through the application process. Something happened electronically. We had to, we were sending emails, and then Chairman Wheeler finally got an email, and then we were able to get a hold of somebody. They undid something, we redid it, and then it worked. So just that's what's a summary of what's been going on. So hopefully, and we've also submitted some questions on some specifics with the lost revenue reporting and things, and there's not a lot of quick response. It basically refers to the information they've already sent, and they've created a Q&A page, and that's what they're referring you back to. So right now anyway, so hopefully it'll get better in regard. So as far as the subcommittees and stuff, that all of you have started, Chairman Wheel and everyone has started. I think it's good, but I would highly recommend reading the NACO information. It helps to identify, in all the categories, and with a lot of county related examples, where the Treasury didn't really, it's kind of that 150 page from the Treasury was not a good read, and is very confusing. The NACO one is it clarifies it a lot. So I would recommend it. I think you'll have a lot more comfort zone as far as in the conversations and what's going on, and in those subcommittees. So.
If I might just interrupt, Mr. Chair. As I recall, last month there was a request that when the money's actually in the bank, you send a email to members of this committee.
Sure.
So that's still
on my
the
desk.
agenda.
Yep.
All right.
Money's still not there though. Yeah.
Okay, we understand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With your permission, I wanted to give an example of something that we're going to have to tackle next month.
All right.
That involves these funds, and it's the voter machine issue. And it kind of describes, in a nutshell, what we're talking about between the two funds, because we wouldn't necessarily have to go out and get new machines if we could retrofit the old machines, potentially, with document feeders. The committee knows, I believe you know, that the software is not being updated for these machines, so we have to get new voter machines. We could have limped along for maybe another election or two, but since we don't have document feeders, everybody's doing mail-in ballots, which is a COVID reason, we think. So potentially 50 to 60% of the spend could be COVID related, and the rest would be, free and clear money, if you say, a lost revenue reimbursement. But we can't get an answer on that, but we have to order the machines. So Dan's gonna be coming to finance next month to talk about the need, because you've got to order them, and if the elevator's taught us anything, parts aren't laying on shelves. You know, so we can't come into the next primary election without having the machines here, with everybody being trained on them. I just want to give you an example of why these funds are necessary, and the answers are necessary. So we may have to order them without having an answer, and have enough money in either fund or the general to cover it if they say no. It's tricky where we're at right now. So.
Mr. Hunter?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Wheeler, are any other counties expending those funds or buying the equipment like Dan's proposing?
I don't know anybody who's got the money yet.
No, I understand that. But I would assume that maybe other counties are similarly situated and they need new machines as well. And I was wondering if they're gonna do the same thing that Dan is proposing for us to expend the money when we do get it, if that's an eligible expenditure.
You know, it is a valid question, and just like us, I think everybody's still scrambling. We're not communicating about what we're going to spend it on or what the plans are, because they haven't got that together yet. On a big scale, you know, we're starting meeting processes, public meetings, you know, televised, community input. We're doing that ahead of the game, but I don't see many other counties that are even this far along. You know, they're just kind of just getting there. Okay, well, we got a bunch of money. What are we going to do? No, we're already starting the planning process here. So I wish I had a better answer than that. But there is in July a meeting with all of the counties. It's the yearly meeting. That was going to be one of the questions I was going to say. Is there going to be a clearinghouse of what other people are doing with their money here in the state of Illinois? So that was going to be one of the things I was going to bring up with the other chairmen and county board members from around the state.
Anything else on this? On Zoom? If nothing, thank you for your time.
All right, if I could,
Sure.
if I could reconnect to the annual report, and also thank Chris and Devlin and Tracy in my office and all the departments. We bugged them as well for the stat reports and information. So we appreciate all the cooperation and communication that we receive as well. So we will be filing for the award again with, you know, this report, and hopefully we'll be able to go through. So it does take a lot of time and work, and I appreciate all their effort as well. So I want to make sure I said that.
Chairman, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Steve, I didn't ask you this before because I try not to bug you when you're doing the audit because it's somewhat hectic, but when was the last time do you think our general fund, and really all of our funds, have been in this kind of shape? I see it goes back to 09, but really, are we talking 07, 06? I mean, have we been at these levels? I'm putting you on the spot, but I mean, it's remarkably different since 2016. We've had a $7 million turnaround in the general fund, but
yeah, we're close to just the general fund. The other funds are the tort fund is higher than it probably has ever been, and before the 2009 economic hit. Pension fund is about was a 1.6, I believe, going off memory, and it was about 2.1 in 08. The general fund was at just over like 5.2 in 08 before that economic hit. So overall, we're close if you total all three of them, but not quite to the 08 number. But we're close. Yeah,
thank you.
We're going a couple million off.
If there's nothing else, thank you. We move to the Treasurer's report. Mr. Alcano. The Treasurer's report was submitted to electronically. So a motion to combine and approve and submit the report would be in order.
Yeah.
Mr. Feathering with a motion. Mr. Long with a second. Any questions on the motion? Hearing no questions, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, nay. All aye on the Zoom.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Opposed, nay. And that motion carries. And what do you have for us?
Well, I just want to say, I'm sitting here watching Steve, and I know I'm visually challenged, but his hair looks like it's been getting darker over the last year and a half. I don't know if that's possible. He's finally smiling. And he's making jokes up here, Steve. It's tax time, as everybody knows. Monday was the first day that taxes hit the mailboxes. They were mailed on Friday. And we've had a steady stream of people paying. A lot of businesses have paid online. So we had a lot of businesses pay on Monday, which was great. I think maybe near 100,000 on Monday just online. So that was great. The date is a little extended this year. So you have till June 30th for a first payment due date, which will mean a quick turnaround because most people want their money, if possible, right after the 1st of July, but that shouldn't be a problem. And yeah, Steve mentioned, I think this is the first year where we haven't really talked about an early distribution. I actually haven't even heard those two words. So I think everybody's happy about that. Boy, we don't have a lot right now. Just it's tax right now. I think the levy, and Chairman Wheeler may know better than I do. I think it was up 3.5% maybe total across the county. I mean, that's what it looked like, about 205 million this year, somewhere in there.
I'd have to go take a look. Yeah, that was like.
It looked like that, and it looked like most taxes were up nominally.
Are you talking about for all taxing districts?
For all taxing districts, yeah.
Not just the county?
No, right, and so you wouldn't know that, I'm sorry. And if there's no, I'll take questions first, and then I have one last thing.
Are there any questions? Seeing no questions, you had one last.
Yeah, I wanted to correct something. Last time I was up here, I talked about pushing tax bills. When we send out tax bills, it's about a month-long process, right? So we have to get the file to the printer. The printer has to come back with test files, and it's a very date-specific, choreographed process. So if you miss a date, it pushes your tax bills back like a week and a half. So it's pretty tight. Last time I came up here, I think I spoke to the fact that the clerk was changing a longtime employee who handled all the taxes. And for that reason, I pushed the tax bills back a little bit to allow for that. I think that there might have been a misperception that was critical of the clerk's office, which couldn't be further from the truth. And as a matter of fact, the clerk provided the taxes, the levy and the taxes to me, I think a day earlier than normal. So if that was the impression I left, I want to clear that up. That certainly wasn't what I meant to, and I apologize if that is what came out. It was just that for planning purposes, I didn't want to put anybody in a bind because I knew Dan was training a new person for a very important role, was losing a longtime employee. So I apologize if that was the impression I left. Things worked swimmingly. So I'm everybody's favorite guy in the county for the next 3 months, and we'll collect taxes. But with the Choices program that everybody now knows about, the payment plan, I mean, I've heard some questions. People call in, hey, I was paying $302 a month. What do I have left? And I think there's a lot of as happy as you can be about paying taxes, but there's a lot of happiness that there are alternative ways to pay, and we hope that continues to grow, and we hope that even with masks being gone away now, that people still use banks, mail, online. Because of COVID, we've waived our online check fee, which was $1. Same thing we did last year. Make it easier for people to not have to come in and expose themselves if they don't want to. That's all I have.
Mr. Hunter?
Property tax sales, we took full advantage of of that property right across the street from the church. What are you gonna do this year?
We'll do this every year, and it's confusing because there are two property tax sales, and they get conflated a lot. One is a surplus auction, which means property that our trustee now owns, right? Which is what Steve's talking about, and that is in September, and that's an open auction, usually at Quality Inn, and there's usually several hundred people, near 1,000 people sometimes, who can purchase minimum bid $750. That's open to the public. Well, they're both open to the public, but the other tax sale is for buying liens on delinquent property taxes. That's typically a professional tax buyer. That takes place in this room. That's this year on November 13th. That doesn't give you a property. It gives you a lien against a delinquent tax. So what Steve's talking about is usually around the 16th, somewhere in there of September, and we'll publicize it, and there'll be a book that comes out, and it's a way for the county to dispose of some property and put it back on the tax rolls, which we all like to do. So.
Okay. Mr. Reader.
I have one thing, and it's a sincere thank you to you and your office on getting the e-waste stuffer into the tax bills. People are noticing it. We're getting calls, we're getting traction, response. I thank you for the idea and the effort to get it in there. It's really working out well.
I appreciate that, and I think that along with those lines, that's something that we can all think about. Because there'll be other ideas next year, and it's a buck slip, and potentially, Andy used both sides, but potentially you could do two things. If you're recruiting people, there are a lot of things you can do. If we're looking to help a 501c3, as long as the printing cost is absorbed, that would be great. And at some point, well, I'll mention it, I guess, but at some point, I'm going to speak with the state's attorney and talk about what the feasibility is for advertising on the Treasurer's website, which could then help defray some costs. Yeah, obviously I take care of the website myself. It's not much work, but there are a lot of eyeballs during this time of the year. And it seems to me it might be of value to some people if it were something we can legally do. But that's for another discussion. But Andy, I'm glad we could help, and I think that everybody should keep that under their hat and say, what can we use it for next year? Do you know what it cost? Was it $1,000?
I don't have the number. It seems to me it was a couple grand for the printing.
But it was 46,000 bills it was stuffed in.
Yeah.
So.
And it didn't increase your mail cost.
No, it didn't.
Yeah,
no,
so
it's grams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a partnership that worked well. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
They move to the Sheriff's Department. The Sheriff monthly update is in your packet. You're up. Good morning.
Good morning.
Very patriotic. Nice tie.
Oh, I thought the red and the white.
So I don't have a whole lot to tell you. You should have gotten this report via email a couple weeks ago. I think that SKDO gave you the information regarding the revenue and versus the expenses, and obviously that's one of the important things. When your revenue goes down, your expenses need to go down. I think last year we did a pretty good job of that, and we are continuing that trend now. You know, the problem is when you reduce some of your expenses, that's normally personnel that you're not replacing. The problem becomes when our numbers change, our out-of-county numbers change, we need those staff. So it's a fluctuating issue that we continue to deal with, but right now we're dealing with it pretty well. So, and we'll continue to do so.
Are there questions from this committee? Ms. Weber.
I saw an article in the Tribune about McHenry County voting on ICE, and
Yeah, so there was a group, and the name escapes me, but they have been pushing McHenry, and the makeup of their board changed a little bit during the past election. And I believe it came out of a committee that they basically recommended to get rid of ICE. I've had a number of conversations with their sheriff up there, Sheriff Bill Prim, who is a good friend of mine. We get along really well. And from the beginning, he said this has been going on for a long time. And the vote, the entire board, common sense prevailed, and they chose to continue. But yeah, that happened a couple weeks ago, I believe, in McHenry County.
it was pretty big headline.
Other questions, comments? If not, thank you.
I do have one more thing just to
Okay,
keep
good.
this board advised, this committee advised. We did have another inspection from ICE. We continue those, which are fine. I always say that, getting inspected by an outside organization or an outside group gives us fresh eyes and makes us better. So while that week is a little bit hectic, it does benefit us. And I will, if I can indulge me for a minute, I'll find this email that I got. I think it's just important that you as a board know what you're getting from departments. That's not what I wanted here. This is from the lead inspector. And I'll just read bits and pieces of it. But the inspector's name, and they're not from Illinois, and this is the ODO, which is the Office of Detention Oversight. They are literally internally ICE. So it is ICE that is inspecting us. The other inspection is Nakamoto, which I've talked to you about before. So on the call before the closeout, and the closeout is when they tell you what you've done wrong, what you've done right, and so on. Prior to the closeout, this inspector by the name of Cuthbert Jacobs stated that in 37 years of federal government work, he has never worked with such a good organization. We were extremely prompt, knowledgeable, patient, and willing to learn. He stated several times that our staff was the best in the business and cannot wait to visit our facility. He also stated that we understand that we are not perfect, which I've said before. However, we do understand where we need to make improvements and have them implemented in a timely manner. And then on the closeout call the following day, he gave credit to our staff that were involved, including Corporal Joe Hernandez, Sergeant Kelly Love, and Officer Chris Larson. He stated their hard work is why we are so successful. So credit to them, and a credit to our jail administration for doing a great job for these inspections, because they are not easy. As I've showed you, the standards that we're dealing with ICE, which was about this high. And a matter of fact, we are getting inspected today by the Illinois Department of Corrections. So it's one inspection after another. So,
Mr. Hunter?
In light of that narrative that you read bits and pieces of, had you thought about putting that online and also forwarding a copy to connect to Mr. Golden at all? That may be appropriate.
I think I've learned over the course of the last, since 2016, that it doesn't matter how good, bad, or otherwise. It does no good. So I would just be killing trees and wasting time.
Can we have a copy?
When I get it.
Okay. Nakamoto too?
Yes, when I get it. Yeah, they're about 60 to 90 days out.
Anything more? Ms. Weber?
I would like to thank Kelly for, excuse me. I'm sorry, I have something else.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm good.
Just, I'm gonna thank Kelly.
Oh, yeah, no, me too, all the time. She does a great job.
Sorry, I interrupted.
You finished?
I'll wait till I get to other business. I'm so sorry.
All right. I have nothing from the auditor's office.
I have a couple of questions for the auditor.
All right.
Oh, that's right. 16 months since he's come to a meeting.
Whoa!
I just thought I'd mention that. 16 months now.
If there's nothing else there, under other business. Mrs. Weber.
A thank you note for Kelly because of all the paperwork and all the things and all the emails and all the things she has to provide us. I appreciate her a lot. Thank you.
Is there old business to come before the committee? Is there new business to come before the committee? Mr. Hess?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? Mr. Long? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay.